Can you hear me?
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
I,
hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Good, good.
I seem to have had um, internet connection issues. Welcome to Africa.
No big deal. That happens. Gosh, that happens here too. Sometimes
So
you
I'm
gotta.
I'm currently I'm currently connecting through my mobile, and I think I need to just recharge just in case. I
Okay.
don't want to run out of data. Do you mind if I take a minute or so? Let
No, you're good.
me just. How are you?
Doing good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, 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 good.
Yep. Just actually just
Um,
got up here.
we're we're in the midst of a lockdown, third wave lockdown, and our previous president was arrested on Wednesday night. Um, no, was it Wednesday? Yeah, Wednesday last week, and imprisoned because he was in contempt of court.
Wow.
Um, and so his local supporters have decided that he he would be better freed,
Man, that's
and are now rioting across the city. So really interesting.
yeah. It sounds like it. It's pretty
Uh,
crazy.
yeah, a little bit dangerous for some to be out.
Man, it's pretty.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
definitely that's crazy.
Marcus Mobile. Okay, I think we're good to go. Great,
Alrighty. Cool. Cool.
super, good.
So, thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. It's definitely cool to get to talk to you for on multiple
Great.
levels. Just for you to be you know somebody who knows a lot about something is interesting, but also somebody who is from somewhere that I've never been. I've never talked to somebody from, and that's cool part about the podcast. I get to talk to different people from all over the world, and so it's cool to meet you.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, I'm really happy to be taking part in this. I did a bit of research just leading up to today's podcast around the and I think I listened to your autophagy or your fasting introduction more than anything. It was a real fasting introduction,
Yes.
and really I think you did touch on some very important areas. Many when I look into your podcast following, there's seems to be a lot of people that are in the weightlifting in the weightlifting sector, and really I think fasting certainly will benefit them from a lean muscle growth perspective, and those benefits are enormous. And I think, however, when I looked really at the heart of what fasting can offer, and autophagy in itself, the real benefits are around allowing people's metabolic disorders to be reversed. And these metabolic disorders, you just have to look to Texas, the home of the supersize, really, um, and the obesity rates that are coming out of there. They were saying things like 35% of all kids are obese in Texas. There's something like 2/3 of Houston are overweight. 1/3 of Houston is morbidly obese. And so a market that you think would be open to accepting things like metabolic change and how they curtail their calorie intake. But it's not that sort of culture in Houston. It seems bigger is better. And they were talking about portion sizes. So fairly elderly ladies talking about the portion sizes that they really have exploded since the late 90s. And yeah, so in my sort of very layman's research, I did pick up a lot of areas that we could possibly help your audience just understand the real benefits, firstly of fasting and then of autophagy?
Yeah, definitely. And that's an issue, all over in America for sure. It's something I live in Kentucky. It's a pretty small state. We have a big city, which is where I live, but pretty much other than that, it's very, very, small towns and everything like that, which you know, typically, if you're looking kind of generalizations, you're seeing more of these issues, um, kind of like, I guess that it's more of an issue of like not being educated on healthy lifestyle, or not being pushed in that direction a lot of times, maybe in a smaller community or something like that. And
Right.
so I think it's a huge issue, and I'm excited to definitely get to talk about it.
Okay.
But first, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit,
Sure.
tell us a little bit about you. I think
Sure.
that's where we'll start.
Sure. So, Daniel, thanks again for inviting me onto the show. My name's Marcus Stevens. I reside in South Africa, sunny South Africa, the southernmost tip of Africa. And I run a autophagy and fasting clinic. And we're a family business, and we're owned by a herbalist, so a qualified master blender. So my wife happens to be that person, and we use herbs and natural remedies to help people with ailments from lack of sleep all the way through to cancer. We are huge CBD users, so I don't know if that is something that your audience is aware of. And just a quick intro: the CBD plant comes with a psychoactive element to it, which is THC. And then there is the CBD, which is the cannabinoid structure inside the plant, and that's really used for medicinal purposes. And so we're a registered medicinal supplier of CBD in South Africa, and really underwritten and underpins my entire fasting business. I haven't always been in the fasting business, and I haven't always been in the healthcare business. I was a previous executive at Microsoft in South Africa. And so I got to travel the world through my work with Microsoft. Seattle was somewhere I'm quite familiar visiting at least 2 to 3 times a year. And so I was a busy executive, and through poor diet, living on airplanes, eating fast on the go food, and reducing my ability to exercise, I certainly developed some underlying health issues. This led me to a stint in hospital where they removed 40 centimeters of my lower colon in a sort of a emergency operation. And that was about 10 years ago. And since then, I've started to sort of really kind of pay attention to my health. It wasn't something I could avoid anymore. And what came out of that traumatic experience of surgery was the introduction of blood pressure medication to my regime, an introduction of insulin dependency into my regime, and sleeping tablets. So I was quite dependent on the chemical requirements for my body coming out of that traumatic shock. And really what that traumatic shock did was it changed my body cellularly. And at a cellular level, my body responded differently to stress and to anxiety. And these are two massive factors that we're going to deal with as we come out of the COVID existence, or should I say our new life out of COVID. We'll certainly need to address anxiety, depression, but also, we'd start to look after our own health a little bit more responsibly, I would think. And so really that's my background in terms of my own personal journey around fasting. And then, my mom is also somebody who was dependent on chemicals. So she was dependent on blood sugar medication. So I think it was glucophage, or over there they call it metformin, and to manage her sugar. And my mom just couldn't manage her weight, and her weight was increasing over a 10-year period. And my mom has been critical about her weight. You know, ladies are very, very critical about their own weight. And she gained about, and I'll try and do it in pounds, she gained about 25 pounds in about 8 years. And this really, it really worried my mom. It really, and she got to the point where she was losing hope. And that then led to her being hospitalized. And that was for anemia. And that means that you don't have enough red blood cells, and your body lacks iron and can't absorb iron, and iron very important to our systems. And that landed her into intensive care with blood transfusions. Okay. And at that point, we were sort of at mom's bedside every 3 months, and it really worried us as a family. And something my mom said to me while she was lying in ICU was, you know, son, when I don't eat, I feel so much better. And it really resonated with me, because I've been exposed to my mom over the years, you know, dipping into sugar comas, and as youngsters, growing up in a single parent household, that was quite traumatic to see your mom lose consciousness and have to call the emergency services. So it was something that really resonated with me, and I watched my mom, and when she didn't eat, she really had good health. And this led me to do a bit of investigation. And at the same time, around 2016, the medical prize, the Nobel Prize for Medical Research, was won for autophagy. And that was a groundbreaking moment where science is now being able to prove that autophagy, just for your followers, just to understand, autophagy is activated out of two main drives. One is exercise, and the other one is calorie restriction. So that's, and let me explain autophagy. So autophagy is from the Latin eat thine self, and literally what the body is doing is eating itself. And many people would say, well, then is it eating the good, and will it eat my muscle, and will I lose muscle tone? That's not the case. So I'll try and explain autophagy as I do to a lot of my clients, which is, can you imagine that you put the body into a state of emergency? So we've restricted calories, there is nothing coming in, and the body starts to do a stock take, and it starts to say, I need to fuel this amazing body of mine, and I need to, however, clear out any debris. I need to be as efficient as I can to survive this calorie restricted environment that you put yourself in. And that really is the start of autophagy. But autophagy can also be activated through exercise, and particularly through high intensity resistance training. Okay. And that, I think, for your audience, certainly in the weight and the bodybuilding side, is certainly very important to hear. And really what the body does is it gets efficient. So I'm not saying that there are bodybuilders out there that are carrying extra weight that couldn't benefit from fasting, just to lean up, maybe before competition or whatever goals that they're trying to achieve. But really what it is doing is creating a more optimally efficient engine. And that, I think, is important for people to understand. And that really is possibly just a bit of background as to how I came into autophagy and how I came into fasting. And I actually was carrying, and I'll try and convert it into pounds, I was carrying 238 pounds about a year and a bit ago. And I'm still on my own journey. I still have another probably 14 pounds to go. So I'm on my own journey. I'm by no means complete. But I have certainly got benefits purely out of the weight loss side, but also I am diabetic, I'm insulin free, I am hypertensive medication free, and I'm sleeping tablets free. So that for me was really a massive achievement within the last 18 months, call it 2 years, that I've been really focusing. I mean, I've dabbled around with fasting, but really in the last 2 years, I've honed down in the autophagy space.
It's pretty crazy. I think I think fasting has this kind of like this thing around it to where it's like either people see it as this really good thing and really usable thing, or it's kind of seen as a negative to where like, oh, I need to eat. Eating's healthy. Like, if I don't eat, something's going to go wrong. All these things are going to happen. So I think that's interesting how we have these kind of like two completely different viewpoints on something. And but before we talk a little bit about that, I think it's very interesting how you kind of have experience, traveling around the world, getting to see different things. What are some of the biggest kind of like health differences when it comes to, you know, South Africa versus America versus maybe somewhere else? Like, is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think I mean I'll just try and give you an unpolitical view, because it can get that way. South Africans are very inclined to drive a political conversation, because it surrounds us so heavily, coming out of a very kind of horrible, destructive past. But what came out of that was we have very low income and poverty line communities that really don't have much choice when it comes to their nutrition, and they're buying food that is processed food, that is cheap to create and cheap to distribute, and bulk the stomach, as such, as they would say. And I find that when I look at other regions of the world, I don't quite find the poverty that Africa suffers from to the degree that we suffer from. Although, having said that, I've been to Turkey. There's certainly some impoverished areas in Turkey, and then in fact, poverty is global. So from that perspective, but I think that in South Africa there isn't much education done around nutrition, and simply put, there are grain companies and corn companies that are huge in the agricultural space, that create products that are really laden with what I call the devil, which really is carbohydrates, and particularly carbohydrates since the late 70s and early 90s. There is unfortunately there's a product called hybridized wheat, and I don't know if you know much about hybridized wheat.
I don't.
It's if you don't mind, I'll just quickly look at some notes. So Norman yeah, so Norman Bolgue, who was actually from Texas, actually created a product called hybridized wheat, and that was really to improve the yield of wheat. So wheat used to be a very tall grass that grew and didn't have much to the substance of that wheat, and therefore took up huge amounts of space to get a decent wheat. But then through some genetic modifications that started actually in Mexico, because in Mexico they really wanted to improve the yield of their wheat crop, and that's really where it all started. And in 1969, Norman won a Nobel Prize actually for his hybridized wheat, and really what he was doing was improving the yield of wheat. And now we've got wheat that is really short and stocky and really heavy, and the reason for that is that it was dropping on the higher growing wheat. And I guess that is probably something that in Africa has been really manipulated in the market to create foods so that the mass industry or the mass public can actually consume it, and can actually eat. So those are some of the big differences. The other differences, I think, is we've lost a lot of our traditional heritage in terms of the way nutrition is communicated through generations. You might know there are certain zones in Europe that are really high in terms of life expectancy, really low in terms of chronic illnesses. And these communities, if you'd like to call them that, have consumed healthy, good fats for a long time inside their diet, and they've limited the carbohydrate intake. But even they've been affected by hybridized wheat, because there are very few countries that are not dominated by hybridized wheat. And the reason that hybridized wheat is so bad for you is it really has something called amylopectin A. And amylopectin A is one of those insulin increasing, so it sharply increases your blood sugars and insulin level, or your blood sugar level, which in turn raises your insulin. And in turn, once insulin is raised, the body is unable to process the energy that it's converting into anything but fat. So, and that's where the metabolic disturbances started, was in the late 90s, where, and then food production globally has taken a global approach. So we've got massive manufacturers like Kraft Foods, you've got your Unilevers, you've got your Monsantos, you've got, I mean, they're big businesses, Nestle, big businesses making global product and distributing that product into markets that possibly see them as convenient, see them as tasty, because they are fairly loaded with sugars and preservatives, but also they're cheap. And so these products are adopted quite unknowingly to those countries that have no nutritional background. And I guess that for me is the big, I don't know if I've answered the question well enough, but I think for me that's the big differences in certain regions is maybe it's actually around, so food security, cost, and legacy, or should I say generational, generational information.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, initially I think you can look at it as like, this, we're trying to feed more people, we're trying to make sure people don't go hungry, but do you think it's do you think that's it, or do you think this is a bigger, profit scheme, the whole, increasing or changing how we eat, increasing different, macronutrients and do you think that it's a good, not necessarily like came out as a good thing, but do you think that like do you think it started out good and just kind of turned into something that was leading into all this bad thing?
I mean, just the hybridized wheat invention, it was there because it was kind of post-war. We saw, or Second World War, we saw mass increases in population. We saw technology advances. We saw, for lack of a better word, a really fertile environment for us to expand our families and to start consuming. And we started that consumerism drive in that period. And then I think you're right in saying, was it actually intended to always be a money-making adventure or venture? And is there something sinister behind it? I don't think it started out that way. And I think it really did try and address this idea of convenience, big families, growth. I think that was certainly its intention. And I don't think that there was any testing done around, for instance, the effect of hybridized wheat on amylopectin A and actually what that causes, its long-term cause on diabetes. However, having said that, we certainly, as a consumer-driven output of what the times were showing, food was also an area that we overconsumed. And then we got, and the whole story changed around how many meals we should be having in a day, and then got marketed to us that you need to look after your nutrition. But I'm not sure that they were really looking after nutrition at that point in time. I think they were ticking tick boxes to making sure that these are the food groups that appear. So rich in vitamins and iron. Which vitamins, how much iron, And that's Kellogg's, standard line on their cornflakes was, enriched with vitamins and iron. And unfortunately, it then became greed. And we haven't done ourselves any good as a human race by not questioning, number one. And then two, just because we've got all these food options around us. And I mean, I can literally pick up my mobile phone, and while we're doing this podcast, I can have food delivered to my door. And it just makes the whole idea around food and its accessibility and then overeating, it's just too easy, isn't it? For us not to say that we need to take responsibility for what it is that we put in our mouths. That's for sure. And I think that is one of the reasons that fasting for me has been so instrumental in driving my health, is that it's a calorie restriction, for sure. And there is no real evidence to say that calorie restriction versus increasing my burn rate and versus certain food groups don't achieve similar results. And for me, fasting is more around, I kind of get some benefit out of restricting the number of meals that I eat, and as well as the content of that meal. And there are two reasons. One is I'm an ex-diabetic, and as a diabetic, we're really managing hormones, okay? And which fasting does really well. So I'll keep looping it back to the fasting where I can. But let's understand what I call the hormonal hierarchy. And the hormonal hierarchy, certainly in the food metabolism space, starts out with something called oxytocin. And oxytocin I call the king of all hormones. It's the I'm in love hormone. It's the I love my children, I love my pets, I love my hobby, and I have zest for life. It's that's really the underlying kind of explanation around oxytocin. And oxytocin is followed very, very shortly thereafter by the queen hormone, which is cortisol. And we know cortisol is always been given a bad name by, your stress levels are too high. But you need cortisol, because cortisol is also part of fight and flight and adrenaline. And so it can't be ignored. The queen can't be ignored in that whole conversation. And so as long as the king and the queen are really happy, then the kingdom will continue to thrive, as they would say. And right below that sits their child, and I call him the ace or the jack inside the pack, and that's insulin. So the two, and literally in a hierarchy. So if my oxytocin is really, I really do a lot of work around promoting oxytocin. I spend time with my family, inside my hobbies. I look after my relationships, and I put time into those, and I put time into myself, because self-care is also part of oxytocin. And I limit the amount of cortisol that I'm willing to accept or react to, because a lot of what we drive cortisol, because cortisol is a fight or flight, it's my fight or flight response to a certain situation. And so I really advocate that people take that seriously, and do a lot of work around their oxytocin levels and how they react to situations, because as soon as cortisol is raised above a certain level, that affects insulin. And so people say, I'm eating right, I'm training right, and I'm working hard, right? Those are the things I hear often, and then say, but I can't lose not even a pound. And that's the reason why, is because and that's really what fasting really, really does well, is manage those hormone levels. So firstly, fasting, I restrict calories, and I do it knowingly, and I do it intentionally, and I do it with purpose. And that in itself is self-love. So in that way, I'm dealing with oxytocin. Then in terms of cortisol, I'm fairly poor at managing cortisol sometimes. So I find that quite difficult. So I'm certainly not a guru around the management of cortisol. That's for sure. However, having said that, really that's what fasting is the big benefit around, is managing insulin. Because as soon as we can actually manage the insulin resistance in our system, or the insulin levels in our system, and insulin is responsible for opening up, call it the key of a cell, and transporting all the nutrients and energy into the cell. So you can imagine if somebody has insulin resistance or insulin issues, or there's insulin is the hormone that has been affected by the processed foods we eat, the stress we take on, and the excess hybridized wheat that we consume, then those are real big contributors to the insulin irregularity in people's systems, and that's really causing what I would call metabolic syndromes across the world.
You kind of mentioned like kind of cutting out meals and everything like that. Like, do you think that, and I feel like it is here a little bit, but your opinion kind of there, does it feel like food is kind of like the, I don't know if it's natural or if it's kind of like this marketed idea that food is like the goal of everything, and it's like incorporated with everything. It seems like, we go to a sporting event, we go to a music event, we go to, we watch TV, there's ads for food all the time. We think about what we're going to go and have for the next meal. Like, it just seems like it's in it would seem kind of like it's this natural human thing, but do you think it really is, or do you think that we kind of get stuck in this idea of like, we're obsessed with food? Like, it seems like we can't, we almost like get stuck in what we can achieve because we are just so like obsessed with food.
And I agree with that as a positioning for, from a perspective of, I did the same thing. So when my health was really deteriorating, I stopped going out into social environments. I was embarrassed about the extra weight that I was carrying. It was very difficult for me to interact with people. The other thing I didn't mention as I started in the intro is I played a lot of competitive sport. I played professional rugby in New Zealand, and I was paid to play rugby, and my body delivered me my degree in physiotherapy. And so that's my, and I did a degree in physiotherapy and never used it. And so that was interesting for me as well, that I've come full circle in terms of my use of medical information, because I do understand the body to a great degree. And I even was withdrawing from social events. But the other thing that I was doing was creating meals with the time that I would look forward to. So I'd wake up and plan, so what am I going to have for breakfast? And I might just get my family to tag along. What am I going to have for lunch? And where will I be and who will I be with? And you're right in saying that we are conditioned in that into thinking that food is a conduit to life. And I'm not saying that it isn't. What I am saying though is that we just go back 100 years, and first the word breakfast was really driven in by Kellogg's about 87 years ago, when it was the most important meal of the day. And I agree with the word most important meal of the day is when you break your fast. But let's break the word up, because it is break of fast. It's not breakfast being a morning consumption. That's the first thing. Then if you dig deeper into the words and you look at lunch, it comes from the Spanish. It's luncheon, right? And that's to dine together. And when we look at dinner, it comes from the French, and that's also to dine together. It doesn't mean that we need to be dining at certain times of the day. And I think that's where marketing, and certainly where access to electricity more readily available, these kind of advances that have happened in the world. We're a very social global world now, and I can get on a plane and fly to London in 13 hours. I can be sitting next to my father in London. So that's and food takes, and I use that analogy because food has also then been treated in the same way. So it's been maximized, it's been transported, and it's been inculcated into our lives. However, when we really look at the physiological impact, that it's had on our bodies, there needs to be some explanation to all of those that want to take on fasting so they understand what it's about. So 87% of all fasters that fast, and I'm currently in 17 hours, I'm going to be doing 72 hours. You kind of inspired me to maybe do a 3-day fast this week, and I'll give you some feedback as well around how it went for me. But 78% of all prolonged fasting, and prolonged being non-intermittent, so anything over, I would say, 20 hours, I would consider therapeutic fasting. But 87% of those fasters are not hungry, Daniel. So that I think is something that people don't understand. So I don't eat and I'm not hungry. How? It's impossible. And here's how it's possible. Okay. There are two other hormones that come to play in our lives, and one is called ghrelin, and I call ghrelin the gremlin because that's the hungry hormone. And then its counterpart, and its satiated, or a level of satiated or satiation levels are governed by something called leptin. Okay. And so knowing and understanding that each time you eat, you fuel ghrelin. Okay. And each time you eat to satiated levels and nothing beyond, you stimulate leptin. And so really what fasting can achieve is it can also give you a new relationship with food. And that's why I fast, is my new relationship with food is I know that the hungry hormone is coming to play. However, after, I would say, a month's worth of fasting, ghrelin is really contained again, and you don't actually go hungry. And so then the idea about I'm restricting the amount of calories becomes a no-brainer, because you're actually so full when you do have your 2 meals a day that you're not even looking for any other food. And that's the most amazing benefit that fasting and intermittent fasting can give you, is a new relationship with food.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like we're just so like mind controlled by how we eat. And personally, I can attest to that, just because I am doing it a little bit differently now. But not even a few weeks ago, I would eat 4 or 5, 6 times a day, just small meals throughout the day, because that's just how I felt like I didn't get hungry. It was and even now, like whenever I try to go longer distances between meals, it's like I can start to feel it coming on. It's like, oh man, I need to just eat something and I'll feel better. I need, you know, I'll be more ready to, like, and I think that's part of the marketing maybe too, is like, clear mind, be be productive, get some food and you'll be productive, like that kind of thing. I think that's what we've been taught. That's what we see all over the place. So it's kind of hard to, you know, change that mindset a lot of times, for me at least.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that you're right in saying that. And I think then one needs to then say, so if I am hungry, what am I going to eat? Because again, when we look at the refined foods, and particularly heavy carbohydrate and sugar-laden foods, these are activators of ghrelin. So not only do they push insulin up, but they also push ghrelin up, which then makes you hungry. So I always say to my patients or my clients, I say, just remember that carb chases carb and sugar chases sugar. And so if you just now were to augment what it is that you did eat, and let's say that you stayed in your 5 to 6 meals a day, and one's not saying that you should fast. I mean, I always, you should fast, Daniel. Fasting's great. Everyone should fast, but more a case of what it is that you then putting into your system when you are hungry. So if you were to opt for something slightly more wholesome, so some whole vegetables, maybe some cheeses. I don't know if you eat dairy. If you eat an egg, as opposed to looking for a processed option, you'd find not only do you get better benefits from a nutrition perspective, but you're also going to feel fuller for a little longer. So those are the some of the other benefits are that, yeah, I do think that we eat too often. I really do. And I think that And when we eat, we need to know that we raise insulin. So every single time that we put anything into our systems, we raise insulin. And why? And this is why fasting is so beneficial, intermittent and prolonged fasting, to all those diabetics out there, because that really is what you're trying to manage, is insulin. And once you've reversed your insulin resistance and the damage that you've done from a metabolic rate, that's not to say that you never touch a carbohydrate again. Absolutely not. But one needs to be able to be in a position where we've cleared the debris, i.e. through autophagy, cleared the debris out of our cells, reset our metabolisms, and then have a new relationship with food.
And is there any, like, is there an improved benefit from a like a prolonged fast versus an intermittent fast, or is it just kind of different benefits?
Yeah. So an intermittent fast, and let me talk to you about at which points and how many hours you're getting which benefits, because and this is very loose because the research is only slowly coming through now, and I'm sure we'll get more defined research. I always tend to look, and this is good for your audience, is to look to people that are doctors that are using therapeutic fasting. There are also clinics globally. The Buchheimi Wilhelmi Institute, that is based in the south of Germany and in the south of France. South of Spain. Oh, tough life they've got. But a beautiful setting where they do therapeutic fasting. And so an intermittent fasting, at 12 hours, your blood sugar normalizes. At about 16 hours, or just short of 16 hours, autophagy starts, okay? And at the same time, human growth hormone, or mTOR, starts to enter into the conversation. And I know that you've dipped your toe into that, and there are many more experts that understand mTOR. I'm really fascinated by autophagy and not necessarily on the mTOR state, but just so that your followers are aware, human growth hormone starts to accelerate at around 16 hours. And at about 20 hours, that's the best time. I would say to them, get as heavy as you can on the weights, get as exert yourself as much as you can in a fasted state, and then feed your body afterwards with good wholesome proteins and fats. But that's the action that happens. So at 12 hours, blood sugar normalizes. At 16 hours, autophagy starts, but so does human growth hormone, or mTOR, or an element of mTOR starts to accelerate. And then at about 18 hours, you're starting to get the real benefits of autophagy starting to kick in. And then at about 24 hours, you kind of have a stabilization, and then a hockey stick, real hockey stick, that happens between day one, or should I say end of day one, and day 3. Okay, and I will share with you that you can share with your audience. In fact, it's Dr. Mindy Perez. It's her slide. It talks about at which stages these actions happen. But in terms of getting better benefits from a prolonged fast versus an intermittent fast, it really does a lot of cell repair. And the difference between fasting and using a broth as a fasting, and saying I'm doing 21-day fast, or 40-day fast, or 100-day fast. I mean, these are not 0-calorie fasts. I must tell your audience, that they are using nutrients to keep themselves going. And in fact, if you don't mind me plugging something, do you mind me giving you a little bit of a... Okay, so I have a fasting water, okay, that I've created, which really helps you with your potassium levels, your magnesium levels, and your sodium levels, and good sodium, so it doesn't dehydrate you. But these are the electrolytes that are depleted through a prolonged fast, and these start to get depleted at around 24 hours. And so it's good for you to take good hydration with, and if your audience wanted to look for somebody who does a recipe that's free to the public, his name is Joe Cole, I think his name is, and Joe Cole is the inventor of snake juice and the snake diet, and he's quite radical. he's outspoken, but he, and I wouldn't suggest anyone fast without taking on the right electrolytes and protection. But the benefits really are that if you stay in the electrolyte space and you don't use any calories to kind of, because then you drip fasting in my opinion, and you stick to the real kind of electrolyte benefits, you're going to get autophagy. And that's the difference. You can fast, but you won't get autophagy, or you can get autophagy, and that's really is really what I'm driving. But autophagy is kind of depleted by day 5. So anybody that is going beyond day 5 for medical improvements in their system via autophagy is not getting any post day 5. Okay, then it starts to become about vanity and about weight loss, because then it becomes around how the body is burning about 900 grams, or what would that be, almost 2 pounds of weight per day. But that's more around calorie restriction. But really the health benefits of autophagy peak and deplete peak at day 3 and gone by day 5, and start sort of at 24 hours, really ramping up. I hope that
Gotcha.
helps.
Definitely, yeah. And if somebody, wants to do, a 5-day fast and really see those benefits, what kind of I I don't know the right word, like refuel or like what kind of period
Yes.
would you have to where you're not
Yes.
fasting and then maybe going
Yeah.
back into it?
Yeah. So I think you touch on the 3 areas that I'd maybe like to educate the audience around. So one is, what is the pre-fast regime? Because going into a fast, it's important for you to, certainly if you wanted to get autophagy benefits and health benefits, you want to be reducing your sugars and your carbohydrates to 0 3 days before you get into your fast. So your body's got to be running on purely fats, and if it has carbohydrates, it's from vegetables. So really healthy carbohydrates, and people would then say, well, a potato is a vegetable. No, but it's a starch. So I really mean, let's define that for everyone as well. So leafy greens that grow above the ground, those are the only ones we should be taking in 3 days before the fast. We then have a product. Obviously we've got products, but we have something called a pre-fast capsule, and inside that capsule, really, I'm loading people with seaweed, so kelp. And seaweed has the most amazing nutritional benefits from a micronutrient perspective that the body can actually take on board. So it doesn't taste very nice. I put it in a capsule. In fact, I block my nose and swallow it if you're taking it in raw format. But I would do up to 2 grams of sea kelp in the run up to my fast. So that would be day 3, and as we count them down, day 3, day 2, day 1, and I would do that up to 2 grams per day. And I'd mix that with something like a moringa. I'm not sure if you have heard of the power herb moringa.
I haven't.
So it is it's a really powerful antioxidant, and a detoxifier, but it also helps to start lining cells for the cleanup process, as I would say. And that really is your regime. And then to cut out the sugars and carbs as you go into it. And then dairies and fats, 24 hours before you start, exit those as well, so that you really are on a olive oil for your fats, so no dairy, so a good quality olive oil or a coconut oil, and then some good veggies to get into that last meal, and eat that last meal and get good and full. And then really getting into your fast, I would make sure that you kept some electrolytes, and preferably unsweetened, because obviously it'll break your fast. So you want electrolytes from the source, and you want to be looking after potassium, magnesium, and sodium levels in your system. There are many recipes out there. There are thousands of websites you can go to and buy fasting salts. I created a fasting the other. So that's my super water. This contains all the magnesium, potassium, and I basically drink this during my fast, but also in the run up to it. And then I have what we call regular water, which is literally a downgraded version of that. just to keep my electrolytes. But there are hundreds and thousands of products out there. People have cottoned onto it. You can create your own out of your kitchen. If people are interested, it's 2 parts. It's 2 parts potassium, 1 part magnesium, and 1 part sodium, and that should help them a lot. And that's during fast, and then post your fast, you want to make sure that you break the fast. So now, thinking that I haven't had anything past my system for 72 hours, something happens in the gut area. I call it the second brain. And that's that your microbiome is affected, and microbiome is probably the reason people are so susceptible to metabolic syndromes. Their microbiome isn't as diverse, and I can see just from your facial features, Daniel, that you're quite a trim individual, and you might, when you take your microbiome and you put yours under a microscope versus, say, for instance, mine, your microbiome will be far more diverse than my microbiome. And really what that is in English is saying that your microbiome can break down more food groups and more calories than mine can. And so as you break your fast, you want to be making sure that you do things that are right for your microbiome. So in my case, what I do is I tend to break it with a bone broth, and which really is just the bones in a pot, cooked for 6 hours, and extracting just the fats that come out of the marrow, and then some of the micronutrients that sit around the bone without getting any real calories. So I'm getting a good micronutrient, very soft on the colon meal, really. I mean, it doesn't technically break fast. So some people would say, well, I'm still in fast. I try and use it to line the stomach. And then I'm really, really cautious around making sure I get a good probiotic on board, to then restart reintroducing some bacteria into my stomach, and then followed by a great prebiotic. And not a lot of people are doing prebiotics very well. And the difference, very simply, is the probiotic has got all the bacteria, but the prebiotic feeds it. And not a lot of people are understanding that relationship. So they take a whole lot of bacteria and they put it in their stomachs, and they go, I'm still not regular, I'm still not great. And then others are taking loads of fiber, because a lot of the prebiotic comes in fiber form. So your bacillium husks, your hemp protein seed powders, those sort of vegetables, they're all rich in fiber. And everyone thinks that it's purely just so that it can bulk the colon and I can have a good bowel movement. It's nothing to do with that. It actually feeds the bacteria in your stomach to create the engine, which then processes the food. So I hope that helps you understand how to then sort of come out of a fast. And then the rule is, for every day of fast, there's a day of repair. And what I mean by the day of repair, I mean restricting the calories. We don't go crazy on the carbohydrates or sugars. In fact, I try and stay away from them in totality. And I look for soft foods, and preferably 2 hours apart. So I do a bone broth, and then I do a tomato and cucumber and olive oil salad. That normally is my go-to, where I'm pushing blood sugars up a little bit in terms, but I'm not ramping up the calories, because what happens is the body will hold on. And then it's very vitally important within your first 48 hours to have something with phosphorus in it. So a meat, fish, or an egg, because your body has been depleted of phosphorus through that. And then obviously I've got post-fast caps, but that's just my commercial side. But yeah, and that's the way I would do a responsible fast.
And as far as like the specific meats, you were saying fish or egg or whatever, like is there a specific meat to maybe optimize that, or is it just kind of leanness and everything like that?
So I think that we need to have the conversation around hormonal contributions in processed meat, or not processed meat, but just meat in general. So unless you're getting a grass-fed, free-range animal, you're going to be taking on some hormones from that meat. Not even our fish sources are clean, 100% clean anymore. So I also don't want to go analysis paralysis on what generally a good meat would be a pork. Why? Because it's easily digestible. It's not heavy on the system. It's a white meat, and it carries good, healthy fat. So really, pork would probably be my go-to. And if you don't eat pork, probably fish would be your second. And then I would stay away from, unfortunately, our chicken sources, and the US is huge on chicken consumption. Unfortunately, based on their consumption habits, there've been a lot of compromises that have been made in the chicken industry around the quality of that chicken, because firstly, it's loaded with salts and loaded with waters, but also they kind of been they kind of been poorly farmed. And if we think, and I'm not a vegan, I'm not vegan, but I do believe in energy, and I do believe in positive energy going out there. And if we're taking livestock and killing it for the pure reason to feed ourselves protein in that mass way, I try and avoid chicken based on the way they keep them. But that would and then it, again, Daniel, just depends what you want to achieve. I think that's also important to say. So if you suffer from diabetes or sugar related issues, excuse me, if you're suffering from those sugar related issues, then I would also look for a meat that's low on the insulin index. So we've got the glycemic index. Everybody knows about the glycemic index, and everyone's telling you low GI, low, and it's creating diabetics if they're not careful. But I would go for low insulin. So pepperoni sausage is a low insulin. All the porks, bacon, the entire pork suite is 11 on the insulin index. So that would be brilliant. So I'd get the nutrients that I need from the pork. It's low on my insulin index, so I'm not ramping up my diabetic chances to reinitiate diabetes. And it carries good fat, which is part of the keto part of my lifestyle. So I drive a keto diet where I can, based on its no sugar, no carbohydrate, good fat.
Gotcha. And I think it's interesting you talk about kind of the whole like meat thing, and I think it's kind of goes back to how the carb thing is, like how we're mass producing the wheat, and now we're mass producing all these different things, and people are like not, I don't feel like they're as connected with their food. We like I kind of said before, we have this almost like obsession with it, but we almost like don't know where it come from, what it looks like, it's just it's so weird. It's almost like we're just going to the gas station and just taking it in, instead of like really appreciating it and understanding it. And I think there's a lot we can do to and I think it is hard because we are so kind of globalized in big cities, and we can't all have like farms in our backyard, and or even just like gardens. A lot of people can't even have don't have room for gardens. So it's like, how do we do it? But I think if we could do it, it would make us appreciate and kind of like understand a little bit more about that whole process.
I totally agree with you, and I think that it is very tough. I mean, we're fairly blessed in our household where we've got space to grow our own vegetables. But again, we're using a water source, so and I'm on a water journey that is quite evolved around something that's quite dear to me, which is deuterium. So deuterium is it's present in your body. But it's coming from water sources, right? So the water sources are all polluted. So we've dropped chemicals into it. We've used water, and the water cycle kind of then it gets into the atmosphere and becomes vapor, and then returns. And really, the greatest source of clean water is obviously on the glacier. We all know that. But deuterium in the water, and this is something then I then feed my plants, even in the luxury that I have to grow my own plants. So there's levels of how much we can commit to and how much we can do. But I think you're right when you say it's very tough for us to undo the kind of living environment we've created, and kind of get connected back to food itself and the source of food and understanding food. And not much education is being done, certainly not in the medical field. So as a physiotherapist, medicine 1, 2, 3, and 4, all 4 modules, the 4 years, only one module was dedicated, which is a 2-week module, was dedicated to nutrition. And that's for people who are working with bodies all the time. So yeah, as a physiotherapist, I'm more working on the skeletal frame and the muscular orientation of the body. But certainly it makes a big difference when I don't understand even why I'm saying to somebody, consume this, it'll strengthen your bone, or consume that, and not knowing the nutritional kind of background to those foods certainly has disempowered me. And I think that certainly is a global phenomenon that's present at the moment, is this idea that we have been separated from understanding where the food comes from and understanding how the food is generated. I think, though, that we can make some small changes, and we can take some action even with those restrictions in place around our food sources being limited. In terms of, we can do a few things, and this is where fasting for me also has the benefit, because during my fasting experience and when I'm intermittent fasting, I tend to go for cleaner foods because I'm only eating 2 meals a day. And so just in using fasting as a promotion to me, not only eating less, but I eat healthier, and I'm more conscious of my food that I'm actually then creating for myself. And then I start creating food for myself as opposed to going to a store and buying it, because I'm so engrossed in my life of fasting that I take additional care in the self-care space, in the food preparation space, but also in my training. So that's another thing, that fasting is probably a little bit, it's not something that's obvious and blatantly out there for everyone to see, but just in restricting, so the word fast being restricting something, just in that restriction of something, I'm getting a benefit.
And when it comes to like the fasting period, are supplements, like 0-calorie supplements, are those things that are okay to take during that time, or is that something maybe you would want to stay away from?
So I think, again, depending on what you want to achieve. So if you wanted to achieve weight loss and you were in competition and you wanted to get lean, then I think these supplements are quite useful to you to promote additional, should I say, endurance from the muscle, those sort of things. But I personally, I stay away from any supplement during my fast period. I obviously want to achieve autophagy. So, and you can only achieve autophagy in a very clean state. So I cannot ask my body to cleanse itself and then complicate it by putting other things into it. So that really is the simple thinking around. So depending on what you're wanting to achieve, and I always try and achieve autophagy. And with that in mind, I go 0 in. Outside of water, 0 in.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense to, kind of be as, clean as you can be. As far as like somebody comes to you and they're like, okay, I want to really dive into this and get going on this. What's kind of that first, is it a more of like a mental change that you have to kind of like push people through? Like, what's that first thing you really have to do on their journey?
So I think my experience is split into 2. So there's the chronic health management that our business helps people with, and in that chronic health space, it's less about motivation, and it's less about giving them the what I call the 6 steps to starting, because obviously they're in a situation where it's chemicals, fasting, or death. And those are the 3 options they have. And so maybe I'll leave those for a little bit later in the answer. So in terms of the first steps for somebody who wants to clean out their system, wants it to operate better and drop a few pounds, the most important part is understanding what you're doing in your system from a insulin perspective. Because when you make that connection, you go, will this raise insulin or not? And and when you start having those conversations with yourself, you start understanding that raising insulin doesn't just mean putting food into my stomach. It means, am I going to make sure that I de-stress every day? And that could come out of my training session. That could come out of moving away from negative relationships. It could mean, relocating to areas that give you more joy in your life, right? Because those are going to be the ones that help you manage your insulin. Then the next one is, do I have a strong reason, okay, to actually achieve something here? Because that obviously makes my job a lot easier. Many of people come to me and they're overweight, and it's the weight loss category. It doesn't excite me at all. I'm not excited about weight loss. And so when somebody says to me, I want to lose weight, I kind of give them to one of my other facilitators. I'm not and I really like to focus on people understanding that if you understand the relationship between insulin and your body, what are the three factors that play in that insulin role? There's food, there's stress, and there's owning there's owning your blood sugar level. That for me is what I like to call it. And then those are the three areas. And then to get somebody started on that is then to say to them, in the first 24 hours of you starting a fasting program, if you were to hang on to 48, and not meaning prolonged, I'm just talking about 2 consecutive days of intermittent fasting, by day 3, you will have lost 2 pounds. Now, that doesn't seem to be something that then coincides with me saying to somebody about weight loss. What I'm trying to explain to somebody, though, is that's inflammation. So that's inflammatory water that's carried in your system. So inflammation in your system is only transported through water, and protects your system is protected by calcium. So instead of calcium depositing itself in the bone where it really should, it's depositing in areas like your liver, your heart, and your brain, and making it full of fog. And within 3 days, you will not only clear the inflammation, but you will start thinking more clearly. And that, I think, is something that really gets people kind of excited to test. I'm 45 at the moment, and I was really battling coming out of that corporate environment to keep my mental clarity at its peak. And since I've started intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting, that's one of the big benefits that you can't package. You can't say to somebody, you're going to feel more connected to your thought process. They think you're crazy. And that's probably the most important for people to get started. And then I think there are 3 easy steps. Go home, take out the sugar, take out the carbs, make sure you eat all of them this week. Get them out of your system, get them out of the house, and stop purchasing them. Next thing is, get yourself somebody that, or get yourself a schedule. Create a schedule. Put it down on paper, because you write to remember. We're in a digital age where I type a lot, but write to remember, and put up that vision board for yourself on the fridge. And then the third thing you can do is get started and just get moving. Try. Go 12 hours, go 13 hours, go 14 hours, really get in. And as you start incrementally growing in that space, you'll see your ghrelin comes down and your leptin comes up. So it all happens at the same time, all collides, and then everybody goes, that's been fasting. So a lot of my patients that have fasted now for the last 30 days, they go straight into a 3-day prolonged fast after their 4 days of what I call getting fasting fit. Because I wouldn't do a prolonged fast without getting fasting fit. Because nobody attends a marathon and thinks they're going to run the marathon with a good performance by just starting. So there is some training to be done. Don't let your audience not do their homework around getting fasting fit. But that I think is I think I've given you a good overall kind of high level view on how to get people fasting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest struggles, I think, is just the, where do I start kind of thing, because whether you're, pro or con, it's just, I think a lot of people are just misinformed or uninformed when it comes to this. So, I think it's so cool to get to talk to you, and I definitely, enjoyed this conversation, and
Thank you.
hopefully if you would want to come back on at a later time and, just talk more
Sure.
about it. I think it's, extremely interesting. It's something I'm learning about as we go. So, you know, really do appreciate you coming on.
Daniel, thank you. And I would love to help any of the people around the world that are watching you. And all the best to your channel. Thank you for inviting me. And if there's anything in specific that anybody would like to get more information on, please just reach out to us. We're Autophagy and Fasting South Africa.
Awesome. Well, I'll put the links to all your
Thank you.
stuff below in the description. And like I said, I look forward to putting this out and then just talking more about all this kind of stuff. I think it has such a powerful impact potential on people's lives.
Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate your
Thanks.
time.
Have a great day.
Take it easy.
You
Cheers.
too.
You too. Ciao.
Bye.